Although this video is going to be about something that most Drakengard 3 fans are already aware of, I still wanted to put it out there. Even though I'm sure not everyone knows about it, most people are aware that Japanese Zero and English Zero are two different characters. In the case of Drakengard 3, a lot of people here in the West would probably describe Zero as brash and foul-mouthed. She comes across as very low tolerance and easily irritable. And although some of this is still true for her character in Japanese, the way that she carries herself is entirely different. She's still very much the cut the bullshit, let's get straight to business type, but she rarely raises her voice and often speaks in an almost monotone manner. Overall, she feels more mature and calm in comparison to her localized counterpart. Even when Japanese Zero speaks rudely, she'll say it in a more light-hearted tone. The main difference between them lies in the attitude. Zero is a character that has been shaped into a stoic killer because of her traumatic childhood where she had to fend for herself. She's beyond exploding at people for no reason. Her Japanese character just shows a sense of maturity that her English one doesn't. Zero is overall a very determined character. In English, she feels as if she's excited to kill the other intoners off, whilst in Japanese, she does it because she carries a sense of guilt. Again, maturity and a sense of duty. In Japanese, she almost has an air of superiority about her. She's less bark and more, okay, let's just do this thing because I have other stuff I need to get to and you need to be dead for me to be able to complete my mission, so let's get this over with and move on. I will admit that I was one of those people who paid for the Japanese voices purely because it featured a lot of voice actors that I'm a big fan of. I've only ever completed the game in English once, and I was shocked as to how different Zero was, because to me, it felt as if her character would be the easiest one to localize just because of how laid back she is. She's not polite in any kind of way, but she's not a raging hothead that'll scream at anyone or anything. A part of me can't help but to fear that the localization team had trouble pinning Zero's personality down in the midst of the other characters in Drakengard 3, since a lot of them are very explosive and colorful. So in order to compensate and make sure that the main character felt equally colorful as some of the side characters, Zero was made into someone else when the game was localized. In Japanese though, Zero's character contrasts a lot with some of the more explosive characters by just how calm she is. In the original, 0 and 1 are very much like one another, which is something that I really appreciated because I felt as if it added a lot to the relationship between 0 and the oldest one of the sisters. But in English, that same resemblance isn't really there anymore. The best way that I can explain it is that in Japanese, it's almost as if Zero is more of a mother figure to the intoners, but in English, she's more of the tyrant big sister. The same goes for the relationship between Zero and Mikhail. The chemistry between Mikhail and Zero is very different because of how differently English Zero and Japanese Zero play off him. Of course, Japanese and English are two vastly different languages, and it's impossible to carry over the exact wording when working with the two of them. But I'm tired of people being too lenient with localizations. I mentioned this in my previous Lost in Translation video as well, but there's no harm in localizations unless the original message of said thing that is being localized is lost. Had it been a minor character, I wouldn't have cared as much. Surely I would still have noticed the difference, but considering that Zero is the game's main character, it's very hard to overlook how different she is. English Zero isn't bad, but when comparing her to the Japanese version, you can tell that you're dealing with two different characters, and therefore she is not what she was originally intended to be. Simple as that. Trust me, I know that being a translator is not an easy job. There are tons of works that are borderline impossible to translate and localize to make enjoyable for an English-speaking audience. My goal isn't just to sit here and try to convince you that localizations and dubs are the root of all evil, because that's just not true. The whole dub versus sub thing is a super common debate that comes up a lot when discussing movies, animation, and video games. Obviously, it ultimately comes down to preference. Working as a translator requires a lot of knowledge about not only the language that you're working with, but also the culture. The best translation is usually not a literal one, and you're expected to take some liberties. But you wouldn't completely change the message of what someone was saying for the sake of making it more appealing to the people listening. The original creator's message being lost in translation will always be a reoccurring risk with localizations. A majority of localizations are inaccurate translations because of the fact that certain words, idioms, and speech patterns just don't translate into other languages. Some changes are completely necessary in order to make a work understandable. The problem problem occurs, however, when the original work loses its meaning or has its meaning twisted, as that is essentially just rewriting the meaning of the original because it wasn't seen as adaptable enough. Instead of giving us the original story, we're presented with a story that we're expected to like more based on linguistics and cultural norms. A localization's responsibility is to take a character and fit that character into a certain mold. The mold looks different depending on what language and culture that the localization team is working with, of course, but in order to fit a character into this mold built up of completely different cultural norms and linguistics, some parts may need to be cut off in order for them to fit. However, if they take away too much, they might just have to add something else to the character instead to even it out. This becomes problematic when it differentiates itself too much from the original creator's vision simply for the sake of popularity and sales. This really should go without saying, but since I did clarify it in my previous Lost in Translation video, I'll say it here again. This does not have anything to do with the voice actors themselves, merely the scripts and the localization of the character. Voice actors are only given scripts and directives. Then it's up to them to perform the version of the character that the director instructs them to perform. I'm not particularly biased towards either Tara Platt or Maya Uchida. There's nothing wrong with the performance of either Japanese or English Zero, but they're not the same. Maya sounds very soft and calm. She obviously raises her voice when she has to during emotional scenes, but overall she has a very low and very cool tone. Tara has a more aggressive and malicious tone overall. Tara Zero sounds pissed off, where Maya Zero sounds indifferent. Obviously, you are allowed to like English Zero more, and you are allowed to like Japanese Zero more. It's a matter of preference, and I'm not trying to tell you that you're wrong for liking one more than the other, as different characters resonate differently with different players. Just because something's been well localized and is seen as adaptable for another audience or another culture shouldn't give it a free card to ignore the source material. The point of localization is to take the material and make it understandable for another culture. When you start ignoring the source material in order to make tweaks to make it seem more appealing to your audience is usually when things tend to go haywire. With a game like Drakengard 3 where the Japanese voices weren't as easily accessible as most games nowadays that are equipped with dual audio, I think it's upsetting that Zero is so different. Considering that players would have to pay to find out what the original Zero was intended to be, I feel as if a lot of people missed out because she is a very unique and complicated character. I hope you learned something new today, and I hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you so much for watching.